start recording, and I'll turn things over to Dan.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to confirm that you can see the screen that I'm sharing.
Not at the moment. We see screen sharing interrupted again.
We'll just, yeah, I'll stop and restart the screen share and then just, okay. Are you seeing, let me know when you see something.
Yeah, we see, screen sharing interrupted again. Okay, now we see about today's Quality 4.0 session.
Perfect, that's what I'm displaying. So
Great.
good afternoon, everyone, in the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond. I had the pleasure of visiting the Commonwealth of Virginia in September 2017. I spent some time in Alexandria, Virginia. It's a beautiful city and left me with a very good impression of the remarkable history of not just your state, but your country. So it's indeed my honor to speak to you. Today, I am giving the talk that I previously delivered at the Lean Six Sigma conference in Phoenix in February. Phoenix is a very nice place that has its own history. So one of the benefits of ASQ is that by being dispersed across different geographies, you get a chance to interact with a variety of people. So with this particular session, to summarize, is these are the steps that are recommended prior to automating your processes. So it's looking at the type of analysis, the type of not just the business analysis, but also the technical review for understanding what your purpose of automation is, what you need to do in preparation, and the best approach to getting your desired outcomes. So as we go through this, I would, in the interest of time, and especially as this is a lunch presentation, I will go through the steps start to finish, and then at the end, when we have questions, I can address them at that point, and then scroll up and down the presentation. All right. So just as an agenda, Norval, can you confirm that you can see the now 4-part agenda without?
We got screen sharing. Oh, there's the agenda. There may be a little bit of a lag between slides.
Yeah, that's not unusual for this type of webinar. So we'll just keep a very steady tempo on this. And so looking at the approach that I'm going to share is refining the process, defining different types of automation. Automation is not homogeneous, and there's a correct approach for each particular scenario. And then looking at what are the benefits. So how do you build the business case to justify the work that will be needed, and trying to understand who gets the savings, every dollar of it. So first, this is a pro automation. As part of the overall Quality 4.0, what this embodies is the integration of current technology solutions to long-term quality problems. It is reflecting not just of a merger of those particular items, but the enhancement and exponential improvement that can be realized. Automation is one of those capabilities. So rapidly improve speed and predictability of process because you have a consistent manner of completing it. It's lower cost and higher rates of reliability and availability. People have, whether they work an 8-hour or 12-hour shift and then have to be replaced, a machine can work, or not just a machine, but a program, device, or application can work 24 hours. So it's something that adds not just flexibility, but it makes, as with every process, there is a backlog and a throughput rate. So the backlog can be addressed more quickly if the throughput is quicker. And that helps with capacity, that helps with productivity, and ultimately leads to not just cost savings, but new opportunities. So when it's properly applied, automation represents enhanced performance relative to human effort alone. However, automation works if prerequisites are completed, and that's what I will elaborate on. So the initial baseline of current conditions, as quality practitioners and professionals, this is where we can support our organizations, our departments, by helping our stakeholders, our internal and external customers, to understand what are we doing today, what are we doing accurately, and this is not to pass judgment on whether it's the correct or incorrect. It's just understanding what's the baseline against which to compare any progress that could be made by automation. So in this sense, it's time and service. Time is really about how long from start to finish. So even before you have the durations, the starting point is when you have all of the dependencies, you're not kept waiting for anything that's needed. So then from that point, how long does it take until the process is completed? That is the end-to-end duration. Within that time, there are really two categories of activity. One is when someone is got hands-on adding value, doing something, whether it's in a manufacturing process, they're machining a part, or if it's a transaction when they're actually capturing the information. And then the waiting time. This can be time from, getting through the lead time or the backlog time until that particular work comes to be done. And also, if it's a multi-step process, how much time is spent between steps. And this is where the introduction of the 7 or 8 waste characteristics to lean are applied. Automation will not only speed up the processing time, but because the backlog can be automatically generated, the waiting times can be almost entirely eliminated if it's a properly designed automation solution. And through the combination of reducing both categories, the overall duration will be reduced. However, schedule is not the sole measure of success. There are also what I've termed as service levels, and that is a combination of the individual quality of what you're producing and how it affects the business. Service levels represent, in the case of a transaction, how long a transaction takes to be completed, and it's about managing expectations. So to summarize, automation not only has to reduce the time spent, but do so in a way that meets or surpasses the existing expectations. So in order to determine whether automation should even be pursued as a worthwhile endeavor, there has to be an initial diagnosis. And it comes down to cost. Automation, there is a cost associated with automation because depending on the solution used, there would be either programming or configuring of an existing tool. There would be deploying that tool, and there would be training people on the correct use of that tool. And there's also validating that the automation as applied will lead to a better result. It doesn't always happen on the first attempt. So could be, if it's, for example, an agile method, it could be multiple incremental stages of demonstrating that you have success or failure. These have a cost, and the fixed cost is, no matter what automation you do, there will be time needed. Expertise is not free, so you need someone who has this expertise to apply it. And variable cost is something that, as the scope of what you're automating increases, that will also be reflected on the complexity of the solution and how extensively it's applied. So your first expectation is that before you say yes to automating, understand what those initial costs are, and that's how you set your break-even point. Are the processes addressing an essential need or demand? It's essential. If you can do without it, then you don't need to enhance that process by augmenting it with automating. So the criticality of the process, the effect of the outcome on the overall solution, on the overall business. And it's about prioritization. You cannot do everything all at once. So you have to prioritize with the most impactful processes and where automation will deliver the greatest benefit. Would the organization benefit from reduced processing time? This is, you would like to say yes, but then what is the true benefit to that? Is it if it's something that, for example, booking a hotel reservation in pre-automation era, that's something that might have taken several days or even weeks to go from the request to the confirmed approval. Now, because we can do it online, this confirmation can come immediately upon request. That is a remarkable example of not just reducing the time that the hotel spends on that, but then because you've got that confirmation, that enables other arrangements to be made more quickly. So that in turn, by having quicker transactions, quicker resolutions, that induces customers to have repeat purchases and to purchase even more from that organization. And then the last one, do processes need to be scalable? This comes in with, if you have reduced duration, increased capacity, that opens up opportunities for more people to use the same service. It's a benefit, but with that benefit, that opens doors for new demand. And is the organization in a position to handle that increased demand? Asking these questions at the start incorporates the planning as automation occurs, which is much better than being forced to react to these questions after the fact. So by having, this is basic business analysis. This is basic setting and prioritizing your objectives in advance of the project. Based on what you prioritize, that will help determine completion and success of that same project. So then now you've decided to pursue automation and you've got clear expectations on what the automation has to deliver. It's important to understand the process itself. Refining the process is necessary, not just as quality professionals. We want something that works, but also the impact of having a subprime or substandard process more rapidly completed could actually be counterproductive to the objectives of the organization. So I've modified, and Norval, just want to confirm that you can see a table with simplify, standardize, stabilize, and streamline.
Yes, and it has refining the processes at the top of the screen.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So this isn't, all the words start with S. It's not an adaptation of the Lean 5S, but what it is something that's specific for how to manage a process prior to automation in order to be directionally correct in the outcome. The first thing is simplifying. Why are you having a complex process? Why are you having something with more complexity, more exceptions? That creates opportunities for errors and variations. So one way to simplify is determine, first of all, what's the cleanest under perfect conditions, what is the cleanest path from start to finish? And then when you have exceptions, identify what those exceptions are that would cause a divergence from that clean path, and look for ways to identify those exceptions as early as possible in the process, even pre-qualifying it to have it done, entirely outside of the process. So what we want to do is reduce the waste, and part of that waste is waiting times. If you have an exception, there's an evaluation for determining, is this exception a valid exception, or is it something that should be canceled? So if you can remove decision points, that makes it a much cleaner process. And the fewer errors and variations, the easier it will be to regulate and make predictable. Standardization. This is very much a lean practice. It's a quality practice, and it's especially important if your operation is in multiple locations or even multiple countries. If you don't have standardization, you will have misaligned expectations, and also the timing of the durations and waiting times will be different. One group, let's say in North America, if their approach to process enables them to complete it within 1 hour, but in another part of the world it takes 4 hours, then that's a red flag that the process and approaches are not standardized. So try to understand what can be done to make both more closely aligned. By doing that, that means that the standard approach is the candidate for automation, and then automating that will uh, it'll lead to a better result overall. Stabilizing is really an extension of the simplify work to simplify the processes. So if there are steps that are problematic, if there are things that cause interruptions because whether it's some lack of information, this is a good category to do the more extensive process review and itself identify the root causes. Why does this process get interrupted with hazards or errors, and then what are steps to mitigate them? So it combines failure mode and risk analysis, and also the root cause analysis to address and correct these situations. If the process is not stabilized and you automate it, you lose the benefit of automation because it will always collapse and have unplanned interruptions at the points of instability. And finally, the fourth category is what can be streamlined. This reflects project management, particularly critical path. So a critical path, as you remember, is the path of duration in which anything along those particular tasks where the duration is reduced, that reduces the overall duration of the process or activity. And it's also about managing where the bottlenecks are. So streamlining, if there are steps that are redundant, and one example is in approvals. If something is already approved early and that is not going to change for the duration of the process, then having redundant checks on that is time consuming and it doesn't add any value. So another example of what to do is moving things that are not dependent on each other from being parallel steps to being done in serial or sequentially. Or I got that backwards. Moving things that are done from serial, like one after the other, to being done in parallel if there is no clear dependency on them. Making sure that, and a good example is in IT infrastructure. I've done a lot of work with migrating stuff to the cloud. IT is a function of many different compartments or capabilities, including network, storage, identity, security. And if these are done sequentially, you'd have to wait for one group to finish their portion entirely before handing off their work to something else. But if you didn't have clear dependencies, then there's no reason why they all can't be triggered at the same time to concurrently produce their project up to the point where the interaction was needed. That reduces the overall critical path and long-term duration, and it results in a more holistic solution. And finally, the third part about streamlining is how many tasks are needed and what can be done to reduce them. So looking ways to either consolidate the steps, or if the steps don't add value, that can't be brought in or combined elsewhere. That takes process review. That takes an understanding from the individual stakeholders of why do they do what they do, and if their response is we've always done it that way, that is a red flag. So as you can see from these 4 steps, whether or not you're going to automate, these are still valuable and constructive steps for any sort of process to be managed. And knowing that gives you, if you have a process control plan, this provides a way to update that particular process control plan as as your workforce gets more sophisticated, as your product gets more robust, any number of reasons. It's a very constructive practice. So then, knowing what you have an understanding of why you're automating, and you have an understanding of what your process works at its optimal level, what automation should be applied. So, and this is not a total list. This is what four examples that I have encountered, and that would be, it's not exclusive to any one type of business. So I really tried to keep this as generic as possible so it could be widely applied. Automation, I've got the point that it's not dogmatic, and there are many variations, not just, you don't have to create something customized. There are already existence of configurable applications, and even within our common Office, Excel or other handling, there are the ability to automate through the creation of macros. So whether it's small or elegant and extensive, that has to fit what you're trying to accomplish. So in the first approach, paper to digital, and even paper could be something like if you scan in something in a PDF, but then PDF files are not necessarily, you can't manipulate, you still have to extract the information. So how do you get this from something paper that has to be manually reviewed and summarized to something that you can simply enter, and because it's digital, the information within that digital content can be automatically mined, aggregated, summarized, and you have the necessary outcomes. So by doing this, by converting your material to digital, it's easier to accept the processes and workflows. Whatever the outcomes are, it's automatically generated, and it reduces the manual administrative work, especially if this administrative work does not require human judgment beyond simply copy paste. Like that is, not a very good use of our time and talents. The second one, quick comparisons and decisions. Throughout a process, there are always decision points in which either what you have meets a criteria or is outside of that acceptable ranges. If these checks can be done, if these are done manually, then it needs attention to detail. And if you recall from Duran, manual inspection, Duran described as still only 80 to 90% accurate. So there's quite a large error range. Whereas if these are automated, that error range is reduced substantially, assuming you've got the correct configuration. And one example, one of the audit credentials I have is what's called hazard analysis critical control point. And if you're doing any process that involves physical, biological, or chemical hazards, these hazards have to be monitored at the critical control point and alerted. Otherwise, once it goes past this point, it can lead to recalls. This is very important for medical, pharmaceutical, food and drug. And if it goes too far, then that creates the risk of a product recall. So having those comparisons and decisions done through automation is leads to more reliability. And the other impact is reduction of backlogs and waiting times. When these are manually reviewed, people are not only, they have their shifts, but they have their capabilities. They can do one at a time, and they have to make sure that their review is, depending on the criticality of what they're reviewing. This is where you can have a large backlog, leading to delays, leading to lead times, which then the ratio of duration to actual work done becomes very unfavorable. So by automating this, you then have more reviews relative to the time of waiting. So something that's in a review cycle, if it only takes less than 5 seconds to review, then you could have it turned around the same day. Combine and consolidate. This is when you have the repetitive work that's done time after time, and doesn't take a particular judgment, it's just carrying out the work. When this is automated, that frees up that resource to something they can be repurposed to something that would find more enjoyable and would be a better use of their time and talents. So a good example is actually found in software testing. There's a type of testing called regression testing, which tests the same features of a product to make sure that each successive build is correct and has the key features. So because those tests are predictable, the outcomes won't change. That is a good candidate for test automation. And finally, rapid repetition of tasks and steps. And this is, the best example is a batch process that would be done in IT, which would carry out anywhere from 50 to 100 specific tasks to create reports, update the system, remove obsolete files. It's if it was done manually, it could take hours, but an automated batch process that does it task after task after task can do it during a low usage time, say between 2 and 4 a.m., and it's ready the following morning. So because there are different purposes to automation, you can have a solution that is fit and suitable for that particular purpose. So at this point, we've got our objectives of why we want to automate, the nature of the process and its optimized state, and then looking at what are the opportunities to improve through automation, and then mapping that to a potential automation solution. So then by doing that, that gives us savings and takeaways, not just for the portion of the business or department doing the work, but for the business and the stakeholders they serve. If the business is spending less money, less time on its internal operations, that reduces its overall operations costs, its break even, and it's more competitive. It can offer its products and services at to more people or to more potential buyers at a lower amount. If the business is better served, they get their results more quickly, and that in turn helps them with their respective activities. There's a symbiotic relationship between a company and its vendors, which if you look at the other way, those vendors see the company as their customer base, and the same way the company's customers, that company is the vendor to those customers. So we're all part of someone else's supply chain, and automation makes us more reliable and more competitive suppliers, which then helps everyone's financial viability and opportunity. So what do we get from this? Norval, I just want to confirm that I'm displaying the table saying savings realized.
Yes, you are now. You've been displaying screen sharing interrupted off and on since you started talking, but it's only lasted a few seconds here and there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's the connection with the platform or what exactly it is. I don't know if folks saw it when I had controlled the screen here earlier for like those first 5 minutes or so or not. Now you're back to the table again.
Okay, and I'll just treat it as a lagging thing. I'm from across the continent,
Right.
Yeah, and it's there could be tariffs on Canadian slides. Could be something from NAFTA. So to summarize, the savings that should come from this are very the process itself, just analyzing the process, even if you don't automate the processes that you've optimized, the waste has been removed, non-value added portions have been reduced, and the processes are standardized, they're more predictable across the organization, and you have objective references that support a process control plan. Process control plans not only monitor the existing process, they're a very good resource to train new users in the proper use of that process. So I think refining a process itself is a constructive activity. Automating it applying the technology, and that's the basis of Quality 4.0, is we've got these long-term quality problems, and we've got the introduction of new technology solutions and business practices. How do we integrate all of that to expand quality even further? So we're reducing the duration processing, we're repurposing the manual effort, and because the portions that work and are standardized can be done with limited human intervention, then that allows our people to devote more time to optimizing, having innovations, breakthroughs, participating in things like design thinking and breakthrough stakeholder analysis to serve our respective communities even more effectively. And finally, availability and service levels. This is something that is very um, impactful to the competitiveness of business. It's very touches on the strategic changes. If your automating enhances your capability, then that should cascade up to the strategy as a powerful competitive differentiator. So by not just delivering within service levels, I've been in environments where missing a service level is a very expensive, not just a penalty, but it's something that when you're in a business in which customer testimonials are determining whether or not you get future sales, meeting and exceeding service levels will generate positive testimonials, which in turn provide new opportunities. If your testimonial is very, um, you know, you're lauded and the customers are not just delighted with what you bring, but also how you've expanded their ability to serve their customers, that makes everyone want to adopt what you're doing. It helps a company to achieve a best in class status. So taking on new demand and reducing impact to critical path duration. So sometimes companies get to a point where they have to turn down work because their resources are already fully consumed. If you have automation, that reduces how much new business and how much growth you can take on. So in all three, you can see the benefits from internal, making it easier on your existing people, having your people work more interesting roles, so that helps with their employee engagement and satisfaction. And in turn, that makes the company more competitive, stronger, and more sustainable. So these are all very positive ways to influence your organization. As quality professionals, if we are seen as the people who are part of growth and opportunity, that's good for our profession, and that will help ensure our sustainability within organizations now and in the future. So the takeaways of what we got from this particular presentation, and I hope that not just questions, but it's shared and it's used to help promote the message of quality and adopting technology to the pursuit of quality. It's important to improve processes and use the techniques like 5S, value stream, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, using our quality capabilities to um, do what we do in a more predictable and effective manner. Business analysis for automation. Automation is a form of product development, and if you do product development without business development, you'll end up with a really cool prototype that no one's able to use. Business analysis connects the technology capabilities with the needs of the business, prioritizes it, and makes sure that what people have not only meets their expectations, but generates the desired results. And it goes beyond cost, quality, speed, and schedule. That shows the return on investment, which will justify its continued application. But there's even a larger, if you follow balanced scorecard, for example, looking at what's the impact to the customers, what's the impact to the stakeholders you serve, and if it's positive, then this becomes an area of greater focus and attention. And when that happens, then quality is associated with future success, which I think is a very good a very good position to be in. And finally, measurable impacts. How do you demonstrate objectively that this is something good for the organization, and you can show tangibly the time saved, consistency, especially if your company operates between different locations, the effect of having a standard approach, and conforming to specifications and requirements. If these specifications are integrated into the automation solution, then the automation itself becomes, um, I don't want to say an enforcement tool, but it's certainly a manner of ensuring and demonstrating compliance. And finally, the last thing is simplification, that you don't need to have a PhD from MIT to carry out the process. If it's automated, you can, the automation can take care of enough of the complexities that um, a modest an employee of a more modest background can complete it, and then you can use the MIT PhD for something more impactful to the organization. So that ultimately, if the process is stabilized, reduction of how long it takes and how long you're waiting, and less physical and technical demands on the workforce, either through manual completion or uninterrupted escalation. So if that's that's really about running things more smoothly. So that to summarize, before automation is pursued, identify those processes which are problematic and take steps to reduce them through simplification, standardization, stabilizing, and streamlining. And is something that is good for the process, and also by doing that, identifies which will be more suitable for automating first. And the different types of automation, four of them are shown, and there are others as well. It's not a total list, but taking items from paper to digital, making quick comparisons and decisions so that you don't have backlogs of needing someone's approval, looking for opportunities to combine and consolidate similar types of work, and getting the efficiencies through scale, and then the rapid repetition of the tasks and steps that are frequently conducted that don't need considerable expertise. So by doing all this, you get the benefits of more reliable and available processes, reducing durations, especially waiting times. If you know that at least something's being done, you are not, it's value, always adding value. And then predictability and standardization. All of these are we use technical solutions, but these are all quality objectives. So that's with quality 4.0, is how do we continue to evolve our profession, and doing so with the benefit of our technology solutions. So on this, I'll open it up if there's any questions or you'd like me to elaborate on anything that I've discussed up to this point. I think we still got about 15 minutes to do so.
Thank you, Dan. We do have about 15 minutes before the top of the hour, so if you do have questions, please use the chat box, and we will take those in order. And while we're waiting for questions to come, apologies for the screen sharing interrupted that was popping on and off throughout. Don't know exactly what was up with that. We did not experience that previously, so I don't know if it was just a bad day for technology or not. But we were able to hear Dan without any issue, which is good too.
Well, I've also forwarded this presentation as well. So and if anyone asks, they can either get it from Blue Ridge or from me. I've got my email given as well. So that's, people can review that on their own at their own comfort.
Okay, so we can also provide a copy of your talk with the follow-up email, where we will share the link as well to the YouTube video and to the survey.
Thank you. That's a very good. One of my favorite parts of presenting for Blue Ridge is the follow through to have that, and that matches what's done through the big conferences. But Blue Ridge doesn't charge $500 for it, so it's a very good benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question for you from Natalia. What was an approximate success rate of automation projects in your personal experience, and what were the main causes of failures?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I will come back to this. The success rates. This is based on the work that I've done at Accenture and also on past work in software test management. So automation in software test management, I'd say it's about 20%, because a lot of as the product's being developed, the need to, by the time you finish automating, the product development is completed. So it's only on those projects that automation candidates are that are better if they're done automated than manually. So if there's an explicit time saving, example is performance testing, and on the parts of the product that don't change for the duration. A point of failure for automating software testing is that by the time you finish your automation, and then you try to apply it to the product under test, the product itself is changed, so it's not applicable. So 20% really means that of the test throughout the test plan, probably 20% can have automation, and that's really the 20% that's either the most stable or is in where there's a clear advantage. As far as processes, the rate is higher, but that's because you spent a lot more on the business analysis, and we had to make a very compelling business case to justify having something that was automated. So not everything passes the business case stage, but of those that do, and once there's a commitment to automate, the success rate was closer to 80%. And there is also, to manage expectations, not everything that's done manually can be automated. So it's that it's it's an incremental process as well. So what happens is they look for the quick wins first that can be automated, and then the most impactful portions. So to summarize, on software testing is below 50%, and then on processes where there is a clear business case to support it, it's much higher.
Okay, next question we have is from Pradeep. I hope I'm pronouncing Pradeep's name correctly. After automating the system, would we still need a team to check on a regular basis whether we are getting any errors or any bugs?
Yes, and you need a technical team and a business team. So if there is an error, let's say automation gets to about 2/3 of its project, and then it reaches an error, there has to be a diagnosis. Is this a technical error of the automation application, or is this a business-related error that the incorrect information is used? So one example is automation looks for data points within various fields or locations, and let's say it's looking for a value, and instead of a value, it's a text. So if one area that's automated is employment applications, is saying what's your salary expectations, and if it's expecting a number per year and you put a text response, that might cause the automation to not accept it and be interrupted. So then it's a decision. So yes, to your question, there should be a team. Um, just as with any software released to its production environment, there should be a team to track for maintenance as improvements are made, and also to track incidents and defects and have those resolved.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Dan as we're waiting here? Dan, somebody did offer a suggestion. I don't know if it's visible to you.
I'm showing just my full screen to support that. You can read the suggestion to me.
Okay, it says that you mentioned a lot of references like HACCP, Lean, Critical Path Method, and others. It would be great if you could reference those in your slides.
Thank you. I've put this one for consideration at some of the 2019 conferences, and I'll do that. Um, if you have any questions on some of the acronyms or terminology, I'd be delighted to elaborate on those. So that's very constructive. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dan? We have approximately a little more than 5 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour. So if anybody does have a question that they'd like to ask, we still have some time to answer it. Okay, the next one is what are the primary factors to consider when performing a cost-benefit analysis to automate?
Well, that's a very good question. And first of all, the starting point is what's your current budget, and it's because if you have money set aside to be used towards this, that helps you determine how big of a project you can go. If you don't have discretionary money, then you have to find that money from amount that's saved. So let's say the time needed to automate, you have one or two subject matter experts that may be needed for 3 months. That could generate in the tens of thousands of dollars. You may need to buy a software license or some application. So that might cost a few other $1,000. So then let's say you estimate that the cost to automate is $50,000. Then you have to look at your process and say, try to understand what does it cost today to run, and then what savings can be estimated if automation was applied. And that's part of the business case. The cost of a process is not just schedule and time; it's also what's the impact to the business commercially. For example, if you're working for if it's a transaction management process that having slow transactions is causing a loss of sales or causing customer dissatisfaction, and fixing that would generate a $2 million business opportunity, all of a sudden that $50,000 automation investment is a much lower comparison relative to 2 million in potential new revenue. So I think you have to look at your internal costs and then the external opportunities of acting or not acting.
Okay. While we're waiting for our next question to come in, I'd like to go ahead and remind people of our next webinar. It'll be Monday, September 10th. It's risk-based decision making with J.D. Solomon, who is a practice leader with Jacobs. He's in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area. When we do our follow-up email with folks here later today, I'll also include a link for those of you who may not have registered for it yet.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and return to the screen.
Okay. At this point, it does not look like we have any other questions. we're going to go ahead and wrap things up for this session. I'd like to thank Dan once again for presenting for us today.
It's my pleasure, and thank Blue Ridge for having such a forum. This is, I've spoken this year at LSS World Conference in Blue Ridge, and Blue Ridge is my favorite of the three.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank folks also for tuning in for us this time. Apologies once again for what happened last week. Looks like we were able to get this one done this week, and we're glad for that. We hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and maybe we'll see some of you online with us again on Monday. Until then, hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye now.